Shalom from Israel, Amariel Ben Avraham. We're going to start a series of commentaries in video regarding the 54 portions of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible. So every week we're going to reflect on each portion and the inner meanings according to the mystic Hasidic tradition in Judaism. So the idea is to understand every word of the Jewish scriptures from the perspective of love. In other words, the idea is to understand that we are an emanation. Creation, the entire creation is an emanation of God's love. Such as we, in essence, are love. This love that emanates from God. So that's the principle. So the point, the whole idea about understanding the Torah through love is that we have to connect to God's love through our own love, basically. That's the main idea. So we have to understand every word said here as an emanation of God's love. Therefore, we have to understand all this through love. So everything that is here, even if it has a strong moralistic and ethical content, that's what the Torah is about. That's what Judaism is about. These ethical and moral messages, frame of thought and action, is motivated by love. We're ethical because we're loving, we're caring. We have moral principles out of love as our essence, our true essence and true identity. So with this brief preamble, we're going to start analyzing these portions we call Bereshit, which is Genesis. That's usually what is translated as Genesis, but the meaning is in the beginning. So it's basically said in English, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and earth. Now it's interesting that we have to note the fact that the name in Hebrew of God here is Elohim. Now our sages understand the name Elohim in contrast to the name Havaya, the four-letter word. The main difference is that Elohim is like cause and effect. It's like everything is created in a way. It's a plan. The plan works. There's a dynamics in the plan. And this dynamic works through cause and effect. It's like an immutable law. That's what it means here when at the beginning when God's created. It's like the creation, if we see the material creation, nature, everything works through cause and effect. Everything. So if we water the plants, they grow. If we don't water the plants, they don't grow. If it's dry, it's the weather and the land is dry. So it's like anything we do has a motivation, a cause, and a result, an effect. So that's the name Elohim. Now, the name Havaya, the four-letter name that we cannot pronounce, goes over cause and effect. So you can change the rules. So that's why when this was manifest to Moses for the first time, directly, it worked miracles. So the split of the sea, the plagues in Egypt, those are unnatural, meaning that they don't respond to cause and effect. They break that pattern, that law, for the purpose of a divine plan. In other words, God breaks his own rules, so to speak, in order to pursue a plan. We'll talk about that later when we get to Bereshit, Shemot, which is about the Exodus from Egypt. But now let's try to understand this a little bit. In the beginning of God creating the heavens and the earth, our mystic sages say that heaven and earth represent two different stages of consciousness. Heaven is some kind of the knowledge of the spiritual, so to speak. We don't like to use the word spiritual because people misunderstand what spiritual means. I want them to make definitions about every word that we say here. So, but the idea is the untangible. Like some kind of dimension where we don't exist. We don't live in that dimension. We live in the material dimension. That's what our sages call earth. Now, we are connected. The fact that we are not living in a spiritual, untangible, unseen world, that doesn't mean that we are separated from it. In some way, we're connected. There's a connection. Everything is one, as we will see later in the scripture. So this is a matter of perception and awareness. So how much are we aware of heaven and how much of earth? So we will explain in terms of, we will try to define what is the interaction of these two dimensions in our own consciousness. We're talking about here at creation. So it's not limited only to two levels of consciousness, heaven and earth. This is an actual division, so to speak, separation between these two stages, these two levels, these two dimensions. So it's like in the process of creation, there were two creations. One unseen to the human consciousness, untangible with the human senses, and another one fully tangible, which is the material world. So this is basically one of the definitions. There are many meanings of every verse in the Torah, but we're going to go one by one and take one at a time, one dimension at a time. So it continues, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the face of the deep. So in other words, there was no definition, there was no shape, there was nothing defined in creation. Everything was abstract. We cannot really grasp, we cannot really assimilate what is astonishingly empty with darkness. Because at that point, we were not created at that point. It belongs really to a different field, a different range. It's a different category of understanding. So people who try, the Kabbalists, all the people who study Kabbalah, they try to understand this. But it's really, with all due respect, it's futile to do that because it's basically beyond our league. We cannot get there. We can't. It belongs to the realms of God, and God is undefinable. The references are not there for us to understand. So we have to take it in the simple way as the Torah is telling us. So this book was written for us to understand or at least get an idea of what God wants with His creation. So He has a plan. It's called the Torah. We have to understand, we have to study what that plan is. What's the point? What are the references? So when the Torah here says that it was astonishingly empty, and dark. There's nothing really to understand. It was dark and empty. So, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters. So it's interesting because our sages understand through this particular phrase, sentence, that the creation of God is separated from Him. And He created everything ex nihilo, as they said in Latin, meaning from nothing. He created something from nothing, or out of nothing. So, which is, again, we insist and reiterate that we're not able to understand this. I mean, this whole passage of the creation, no matter how much we try to understand it, it's really, really divine. Belongs to a divine consciousness. We have human consciousness. We're trying to reach out to this divine consciousness. As we said before, the link, the bridge between our consciousness and God's consciousness is love. But we will talk about that as we read and reflect on what is here. So the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters. So it's like the creation is there, God is here. And God is like hovering, like some kind of flying, so to speak, on top of His creation. Now, our sages say this spirit, this divine presence, wasn't God. It was something that God sent in this thing called creation that He was doing. This was some kind of link with His creation. So the creation is there, now I'm going to create a link between myself, says God, and my creation. So that's the Spirit of God. That's what it's literally written in Hebrew. And the Spirit of God. Here is translated in the Scroll edition, divine presence. So, Rashi and other commentators of the Torah relates to this divine presence as the messianic consciousness. So the first reference in the Torah about the Jewish Messiah is here. So, why? When we're talking about the Spirit of God, we're talking about, as we mentioned earlier, the essence from which everything was created. So we have said that God's creation is the result of God's love. In other words, His motivation to create was love, His love. I'm going to create something, says God, in order to love it, care for it. So then we see nature, we see the so-called, what agnostics call now in the last few decades, intelligent design. So it's like we see life, we see animals, for instance, we see ourselves. The main motivation, the main reason, the main cause to exist is love. So we see pictures of birds feeding their little birds, the animals nurturing, feeding their offspring. It's love. Something that we really forget throughout time when we grow up. But the essence, basically, of our nature, what motivates us to exist and to be alive is love. So we see animals, including ourselves, reaching out for the love of our makers, father and mother. We need love to exist, to be. And love is what gives meaning to life, sustains life. This is some kind of obvious thing. We haven't said anything practically new so far. It's some kind of common sense. But it's an important reference that in the same way, the analogy of a mother carrying a child, nursing a child, is the same image of God nurturing His creation through this Spirit, divine Spirit, the Spirit of God. Now, why they call it Messianic Spirit? Because the object, the reason, the purpose of creation is the Messianic consciousness. In Judaism, in other words, God created the earth, humankind, in order to achieve a consciousness of freedom, complete liberation, total bliss, total connection with God through this Spirit. Well, that's how in Judaism we conceive the Messianic consciousness, the Geulah, the redemption. It's like God's Spirit, God's love would be manifest, as our prophets say. We will see Him. That's the idea. So the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters. Now, water. We have mentioned in our blog, God's love, that every word, every object, every item, every person, every character, every place in the Torah, in the Jewish scriptures in general, means something besides the literal meaning. So we're talking about here water, it's a liquid. At the same time, it has a deeper meaning, an inner meaning. So water in this case represent thinking, thoughts, like the ability to, how can I say, it's not about thinking or discerning, but it's like a creating process through thought. So it's not thinking for thinking, it's like we're thinking in order to elaborate, in order to create something. So in this sense, these are the waters. The waters is like raw material to build something. But again, this belongs to a different dimension, but the idea is to grasp as much as we can. So in other words, we conceive the divine presence, the Spirit of God, the Messianic consciousness, through our thought. We have to discern that. So it's like the Spirit, the connection, is on top of the waters. It's actually touching the water. It's like air. One of the translations of ruach is spirit and air at the same time. So it's like immediately on top of the water is air. That air is God's presence. So in other words, on top of our thoughts, what is guiding, what is on top of, like a ceiling, in our thoughts, in our mind, is the Messianic consciousness. Like this is the guideline, this is the direction with which our thoughts and our discernment are going to lead us to fulfill God's plan. Good. So, the waters. So in this sense, earth would represent the physical life, the material life. Heaven, the soul realm, the spiritual, the intangible, and waters, in that order, our thought, our ability to discern, to think, and create from that thinking process. It's very important. Verse 3, which is the sweetest one of the parasha, God said, "Let there be light." Now, immediately we read before that there was emptiness and darkness. When we we didn't turn off the lights. We left. We came back at night. Everything is dark. Or let's put it in a different way. We entered into a room that we haven't entered before. So we're not familiar with anything inside that room. And the room is dark. Open the door. The only way to know what is there in that room is if we turn the light. It's pretty obvious. So we turn on the light, everything is there. There's a bed, there's a sofa bed, there's a table over there. Everything. There's walls, paintings, if there's any. So immediately everything has its place. This is the same process here. There was nothing. There was something actually. There was something astonishingly empty with darkness. It was like chaos kind of thing. There were things there that were not in order. Then God said, light. And then the light initiated the process to put everything in order, as we will see. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good. Immediately, God separated between the light, and the darkness. So it's interesting to note that light is the reference for everything. Without light, there is no definition of anything. Now we have to take this concept in a deeper way in our consciousness. What does this represent in our consciousness? What is light in our consciousness? We understand it in a different way. It would be knowledge. It could be discernment, so it's the ability to tell between one thing and the other. We do that through light. So light and knowledge are basically together. The more we know, the more we realize the place of everything in our consciousness and in our surroundings. Okay. He said that it was good. So if God mentioned that the light is good, there's something probably in contrast to it. So it's like, well, what before wasn't good, because otherwise, in the beginning, there was light and everything was good. Could have said, but it doesn't say that. It says that it's dark and empty. So then also you say darkness and emptiness are related to something opposite to light. So for the first time we see a dualism here. You see, this is because before, astonishingly empty with darkness, there were like two things. So these two things mentioned, tohu and bebo. That's what I tohu bebo. Whoa. It's like chaos and disorder kind of thing. The first time that we see that two things are mentioned, and then the light And then after that, everything would be dualistic. Also heaven and earth. So this is some kind of twofold aspect of creation. So creation is like, is formed with two things, heaven and earth, emptiness and darkness, light and darkness. Now again, these are abstract concepts that belong to a different, we have to repeat this, a different level of perception that we cannot fully grasp. They belong to the divine thought, so to speak. So, the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. Now, our sages say, this is very interesting, it's like all the oral tradition in the Jewish Judaism. It's some kind of, sounds like a fairy tale, which is sweet, but at the same time we have to pay attention because it's full of content. So they said that everything was perfectly good when the light was created. Actually, the light occupied everything. And it was so beautiful, according to God, that it's like it could have ended there, the creation. It's like, okay, I have light, the life is good, end of the Torah. And everything is fine. So everything is separated, everything is defined, everything has its place. But it's interesting that our sages say, as we were saying, that God said that at one moment he said, okay, this is too good for what I'm going to create later, which is man, us. So he said, I'm going to occult, some kind of cover this light, and then he created a different light. And he said, this first light is going to be for the people who are good, as the light. In other words, when we assume, so to speak, an identity related to goodness, so if we are good, if we love all the time, that's what a good person is, a loving person. A person that does good because he's motivated by love to do good. So love is the cause, and love pursues itself as the effect. So in the blog we have said many times, we have mentioned many times that love is cause, its own cause and its own effect. So he said, okay, if somebody is good as light, he or she would deserve this light. So the wicked people, the people who are not good, in this case people who are involved with darkness, they don't deserve it. Why? Because their approach, the cause, the motivation and the effect of what they do is dark. So they don't belong there. So it's like, I will keep this light for the, said in Hebrew, Sadiqim, the righteous. Now that's what our sages say in the Talmud. So let's continue and at the same time keep thinking about all these definitions, all these meanings, and how they resound, echo in everybody's consciousness. We have said in the blog also, in one of the commentaries, that our subconscious and unconscious minds store everything that has been created, including the Torah. So everything that we read here, we know subconsciously or unconsciously. So one of the points of studying this is to see how the messages that we're bringing up here could resound, could like tap on this hidden memory that we have, like the hidden light of God. Okay, then we continue. So God called to the light day, and to the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Now, so you say, the rest of the narration in the Torah says second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day. Why the first day is not the first day but day one? And they say, he said day one because everything was one. Some people say that God was in his own creation. Some other people say, in other words, God occupies everything. That's one definition. Everything that exists belongs to him, is part of him. And the other one is that this oneness is a reflection of his oneness. It's like he created a reflection of him, so to speak, in his creation. So he's still separated from his creation in the second definition, which the one that we follow, by the way. So he's completely outside of his creation. And he created a reflection of him for us to know. So the whole purpose of creation, we see it in the Torah, is for man to know his creator. We want to know who created us. So God said to us, one day you will know me, we'll be together. As one. As part of each other. But that realization, that awareness is up to us. So we can spend an entire lifetime not knowing and not even wanting or yearning for that. Until we get to the point in which we yearn for that. So I want to know my Creator. I want to know the essence from where I came from. And then we start knowing that, we start doing that as we discover who we are in essence. So we know that we are love, we're made out of love. Then through love we start connecting to the main source, God's love. And then we know Him. But to make the story short, it's like the more we love myself, my environment, my neighbors, the more I get close to God's love. And we act lovingly, ethically, morally, emulating God's ways and attributes, which He, throughout the Torah, we will read, is showing us. It's like He's good because He created everything, one day after day, So we know that He's good. He cares for His creation. He made His creation, He sustains His creation. He nurtures His creation. Now we have to get to that awareness at one point in order to know Him. Okay. Try to make reflections about how these verses, 5 verses that we have read so far, resonate, echo in our consciousness. Is that we have a beginning. We have a purpose. There's something that we have to know about ourselves. There's a process of knowing, there's a process of chaos, there's a process of order. That we do that in the clarity of light, the clarity of knowledge. So as long as we grow up, we start making differences. What is defining me, my culture, my language, the social patterns, behavioral patterns. And then we start valuing, evaluating them and making an inventory. Is that really me? How much these laws, these protocols, so to speak, these norms have been changing throughout time? And what hasn't changed among them? And we can see that the only thing that hasn't changed throughout history is love, the goodness of love. That remains all the time, that transcends everything. However, our thoughts, our ideologies, our principles, our values change, especially when they are not related to love. It's like when we have a personal agenda, it's like I want life the way I want it to be, based on the same patterns that we have been talking about. So we grew up in a society in which selfishness is the reference, competition. That's exactly what we're going to be. So the idea is to take the Torah as a reference, God's ways and attributes, as a reference for us to be. We are His creation. We are His image and likeness. We're going to read that later. Then we have to act accordingly. So if we are love, we are an emanation of God's love. Love is the material manifestation of God's love. You have to be that. So bye-bye consumer society, bye-bye light culture, bye-bye sophistication, bye-bye glamour. Those belong to the realm of ego's fantasies and illusions, as we call it in the blog. So as long as we live in these fantasies, in this chaos, there won't be order. The order is our connection with God. The order is with God, God's love, and love as the material manifestation of God's love leads the way. That's the Spirit of God hovering on the surface of the waters, waiting for us to assimilate the Spirit of God. See, like we have a mind, we have a discernment, we have created our own illusions that we mentioned before. Then we have to clear in the illusions of our thoughts, now waters. We have to allow the Spirit of love, in this case, our connection with God, lead with order. That's the messianic consciousness. That's the purpose of creation. That's the seventh day. That's the Sabbath. That's the purpose of creation. There's a process in which we evolve in order to get there. And there's a beginning. In the beginning, we have to establish order. Use the right references. So we see here that light is a reference. Not a reference, but also a choice that we will see later. So we see darkness and light. It's a separation between day and night. And the light is good. It's interesting because God doesn't say, and the darkness of the night was bad. It didn't say that. He just mentioned darkness and night in the context of chaos. and light and goodness in the context of order. So there's a chaos that he puts in our consciousness, like the negative tendencies in our consciousness, and the good ones, in order to choose the good ones, to choose the light. So in the blog we have said many times that God created darkness, evil, and all the negative aspects of creation, or we perceive as negative, as references, not choices. In His love, He said to us, I love you so much I have to give you freedom. But I want to make you choose the goodness that I'm giving you, which is coming from me. That's what God says. You have to choose. There is no point that everything is fine, because you will never see that it's fine. You have to have a reference to know that good is good. So you exercise free will. So that's the misunderstanding on a lot of people. They say, oh, God is going to punish you if you do this and do that. Again, first verse, in the beginning of God's Elohim, cause and effect. So we have to have an empirical approach to reality. You know, besides God. I mean, even if God exists or doesn't exist, we have to deal with reality as cause and effect. So those agnostics who are watching, welcome. Because this is about cause and effect. So we really have an agnostic approach to reality. We do. So when we talk about crime and punishment, transgression, sins and punishment, we're talking about cause and effect. We're not saying like, oh, my sins and then God is punishing me. No, my sin is punishing me with its effect, its results. It's cause and effect. So let's leave God alone, so to speak, regarding that issue. So He said to us, all things that are considered negative are references, so you will choose the good, the goodness. So in this context, again, we repeat, evil and negativity are references, not choices. Although some people make evil a choice, not a reference. They basically want to be bad. They're going to go against the nature. We say that they are going against their nature because when they were little babies, they were cared for. Some people love them enough to keep them alive until they get older and decided to change their mind and be evil and renounce where they came from, the source of the life that they have, the source that sustains their life. What an irony. That's why we don't understand the Nazi and the fascist mentality. It's hard to understand. These people have families. They love their children, they love their wives, they love their country, they love their future. But they were animalistically ruthless with other people. So it's like, how these people can call love the love or the feeling that they experience for the children and the loved ones. What kind of love is that? That at the same time allows killing millions of people ruthlessly. And then after that they go home and kiss the children. It's like, what kind of love is that? So that studies, I mean, now they are revealing things about the World War II, you know, the trials of Nuremberg. Recently, a few years ago, they were published this book by this person who assisted psychiatrists who were interviewing these high-ranking Nazi officials during the trial of Nuremberg. So that they interviewed them. Those fights are in Washington, D.C., in the pen. Some were hidden out there. Now they're coming up little by little. So these psychiatrists were interviewing these butchers, these criminals. So why you guys were doing this? Why? They tried to understand, and nobody understands that. Why someone is gonna go against their own nature? So this is something that is related to this. Everything that is here, you have to, as we have said, we're going to repeat it, resound in our consciousness. There has a meaning here. What is light? What is darkness? And again, the whole point that God is telling you from the beginning is like, my creation is about choices. From the beginning. So you're gonna make choices. But I'm telling you, light is good. Love is good. We have to understand goodness with all its derivatives. So everything that is synonym or associated with goodness and light is the same. We're talking about love here as part of light and goodness. Actually, it's the source of light and goodness. It's what motivates us, I said it before, to be good and do the right thing, the righteous thing, in order to be part of that light. So our sages say that God hid this light for the righteous. That we know that that light is our essence. So in order to possess that light, to be the inheritors, the rewardees, the people who receive the reward, so to speak, there has to be like that light. So when we leave the material world, we return to that light because that's our essence, that's where we belong. We have to understand our transit, which is very, very temporary. Some people last 1 year, months, decades. It's a transit. We are not here forever. So let's be aware that our experience in this lifetime, in this material world, is temporary, meaning we have to return to where we came from. But the idea is to keep in mind during our lifetime that awareness, that we belong to that light that is good. So we return to it. So we see here in these 5 passages that there's darkness, there's chaos, and there's order, there's light. So we choose chaos, we come back to chaos. Whatever that is. We're not talking about punishment here. We're talking about consequences, results, effects of what we do, the kind of consciousness that we have. So as we, so to speak, breed in our consciousness evil, wickedness, selfishness, cruelty, envy, lust, indolence, indifference, coveting. That's the chaos. That's the darkness. That's what keeps us really, really trapped, captive. It is. We know that. We don't have to elaborate on that. Nobody wants to be submerged in depression, frustration, anger. Nobody want to be good. I mean, some people like it. It's called masochists. But we're not that kind. I mean, we try not to. It's common sense kind of thing. We like to enjoy goodness. I mean, it's fun. The other stuff is not fun. So we say our kids when they go to a party, have fun. So look for the goodness. Look for what is fun, what is nice, what is enjoyable. We like it, we smile and we laugh. The goodness. People decide instead of going to the party, they go to the gang around the corner. Will you see what you see? So then if we start exercising consciousness, having very clear in our thoughts, in our waters, what is good, what is wrong, with what we build, with what we destroy, then we're going in the right direction that God is telling us. I say, don't worry, everything is one day. There's no separation here. Those people, my sins, I'm gonna go to hell, I'm gonna be punished, everything is one. It's in one place. You have to exercise your discernment, be smart, and choose the right side. That's it. So you see, in 5 verses, the first 5 verses of the Torah, we have an idea of what we have in consciousness. Then we have to live ever since this point in duality. God wants us that way. It's like, I don't want you guys to be robots. It's one direction doing everything pre-programmed. No. You have to choose. Therefore, I give you both. But remember, one is a reference and the other one is a choice. Okay, God. And here we are. Then we look around in the material world in the last 15,000, 100,000 years, whatever time limit you establish for human consciousness to exist in this world. Take a look at history, take a look at the Torah, and then we realize, what kind of choices have we made? And it's what we have now. So it's like, we're not saying, oh, God is punishing us. It's not like how God allows. There's some people that are so naive. I mean, we don't want to make a judgment. We just call the attention here. Their attention, actually. When they blame God for what we have made. How God allows this genocide in Africa and the Holocaust. And a lot of us Jews complain about that. A lot of Jews who don't believe in God because of that. How could he allow the Shoah, killing 6 million people plus? This is our responsibility. We allow that. Humankind allowed that. There's no other explanation. All the nations allowed that because they didn't like us, basically. And we'll talk about that as we study. What are the reasons of that hatred? This could have been avoided. So again, it's about choices. It's about chaos and order. It's about light and darkness. So with this we finish. Of course, there's a lot of things in the parasha, but we have time. There's one thing that your friend wants to do, is like to study like every day, but a lot of people don't have time for this. So the idea that I decided to do is like, we're gonna take one part. It could have been inside, but the idea is to start with the beginning. Actually, it's called The Beginning, Bereshit. That's the name of this portion. And the name of the first book of the Torah. To establish some kind of reference, guideline for us to start with. So you guys at home, read the rest with that reference. Everything that was created, what happened later, and then you will understand that you have to make the right choice. Goodness is the right choice. So we leave it here. Then we continue next week, making a summary. It's gonna be a brief summary. We're not gonna go in depth as we did with these 5 verses. We're gonna make a summary of the rest, and then we're gonna start with the next parasha, which is Noach. Again, having in mind, being aware of this reference that we have discussed today. So I wish you an amazingly beautiful weekend, full of love, full of light, full of goodness. A good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, and I see you again next week. Bye.